I watched the
Call to order the Gladstone Planning Commission. Today is the 17th day of April, 2018. We're at 525 Portland Avenue, Gladstone, Oregon, 97027. The time is approximately 6:30. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Langston?
present.
Commissioner Natalie Smith?
Present.
Commissioner Malachi?
Here.
Commissioner Poole? Commissioner Wentz? Commissioner Pat Smith?
Here.
Chair Rowlett?
Here. Let's salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So I'll go over what the tonight's packet looks like. Approval of the consent agenda, and there's two items on that, which are approval of the January 16th, 2018 meeting minutes, monthly planning report for March 2018. We want to introduce our new city planner, and we're going to have a presentation on community planning from Randy Thomas and Brian Early. And then we will have a legislative hearing, which is a real informal hearing. I'll read some stuff about that, on municipal code changes. So all items are considered on the consent agenda. All items are considered to be routine and will be enacted in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a commission member or a person in the audience requests specific items be removed from the consent agenda for discussion prior to the time the commission votes on the motion to adopt the consent agenda. With that said,
I move that we accept the consent agenda.
I second.
moved by Pat Smith, seconded by Natalie Smith. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. The agenda is accepted. So, the monthly planning report. I want to, we've approved that as part of the consent agenda. Thank you so much for that planning report. It's great.
Good.
Looks really good. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to the public and us.
So I'm Melissa Ahrens. I'm really happy to be here and excited to be working for City of Gladstone. I'm coming from California, actually, with over 8 years of land use planning experience, environmental science background as well, so kind of a mixed bag. I've worked for both public and private sectors, so for the state of California, local governments down there, and private consulting. So I'm happy to be here and been getting really happy about digging into Gladstone and everything going on there and learning. So
Can you also mention what role you're going to be doing?
Yes, I'm sorry. I am the planning director, but I'm also a senior planner with Clackamas County. So I'll be the planning director for City of Gladstone.
And we're so glad you're here, and thank you so much for being part of our city.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess we'll start with our first item on the regular agenda, which is community planning with Randy Thomas and Brian Early. So you can just state your name for the record. You don't have to give your address if you don't want to. Thank you so much for being here and for doing the work that you do.
Thanks for having us. I'm Brian Early, 5490 Abernathy Court.
Randy Thomas. I live on Windsor Drive.
So we're here informally to kind of, I guess, try to kickstart a concept or an idea that you may or may not be familiar with, called community planning organizations, or a neighborhood association consideration. What got us, you might say, to this point, about this time last year, if you remember right, we were in the thick of a consideration, a proposal for an apartment complex that was over there off of Abernathy. And through that process of trying to recruit and trying to engage, people in our immediate neighborhood, began to realize the virtue of getting people together for the cause or the issues that are germane or relevant to our particular community. And so that came and that went, and we did what we did, and it's for the foreseeable future we don't know where all that's going, but it kind of created in our minds like, well, this was good to gain community togetherness and how we can partner, and a lot of it has to do with the issue of partnering with the city government or those around that. What can we do to link arms and be hand in hand in consideration? So we'll let Randy, she's the brainchild of this, she's the one who has most of the details, explain more of that for you.
So I've been accused of mumbling, so if I start to mumble and get quiet, you'll just remind me to speak up, right? So as Brian mentioned, when we started working on the Abernathy apartment, some complex concerns, someone had mentioned, well, you're kind of acting like a CPO. And so while we were in the middle of all of that, that was our focus. But once that was kind of complete to a certain point, started to do a little research to understand what a CPO was, how they exist in Oregon. So I don't know how familiar you all are with community planning organizations, so I don't want to waste your time with that. So
just go ahead and
tell you the whole
say
scoop.
anything you want to say about it. And I know that I've brushed up a little bit on it, and we want to hear what you have to say.
Sure. So
would you like us to hold any questions we have till you're all done?
And so this really isn't a formal presentation. This is intended to just really be a dialogue. So I would welcome any questions or insight. And I will say that we've done some research, we know what we know, and there's a lot more to learn. And so that's why at the end of the presentation we do have an ask, so there can be more research completed. And it not just be us, because it's really not about the apartment complex. This is about the city of Gladstone and involving more community members in that process. So again, what I will share with you is just what I've learned in my kind of peripheral research. Again, a lot more to discover. So Clackamas County has a pretty large community involvement program. They have a great website. I did some web surfing. City of Portland has a community involvement program, and all of these neighborhoods form associations that totally citizen-sponsored, citizen-run. They usually follow, I think, public meeting laws, so they have to have meeting minutes and agendas, and they post them all. And they provide input to their planning organizations on the codes and the regulations. So there's, like Randy, you had shared with me the guidelines that you use to make your decisions about planning activities. That's what these community planning organizations provide input on. But in talking to a number of them, there's different models that exist out there, because frequently some communities may not have a lot of planning activity going on. For instance, the City of Milwaukee Downtown Historic Neighborhood Association has a half a dozen major planning activities going on. So their last meeting was really about all those planning activities. Other planning organizations look to, attendance and keeping participation from their membership can be challenging, so they look to bring other agendas to their table. They might involve bringing in the local school district to talk about something. They might bring in the emergency response planning group to talk about something. So anything that might impact the livability of that community, that community association, can be a topic. And those are all things that can be determined if and when you agree to our ask as we work through the process on how we might set that up. They have bylaws, so it's not just willy-nilly. Some of the cities post their agendas and their meeting minutes on their website, so there's really not a lot of city involvement in these. And you might have city council people or planning commission chairs or park and rec commissioners come to meetings to talk about different topics, but it's a give and take kind of conversation. So understanding your regulation, you have to follow your Robert's Rules of Orders here, and you have restrictions on what kind of conversations can happen here, primarily because of a time constraint. These kinds of environments enable a broader group of folks, not everybody wants to come to a planning commission meeting or speak or write a letter, but might have an interest in a certain topic. So they're flexible enough to give people an opportunity to be engaged at a level that they're comfortable with. And it also builds a sense of community around that neighborhood association. They might do cleanup days. They might have barbecues. So it's really, the planning is the initiator or the driver, but it can be so much more. So, Jennings Lodge Community Planning Organization has been in the Clackamas Review dealing with the evangelical property and historic value of the trees. Oak Grove's involved in a lot of things. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to reach out to others to understand what works for them and see how maybe that can be applied here.
Okay. So, kind of, Pat, did you have any questions?
No, I'm struggling. I'm trying to dig up a term out of my memory.
So you guys...
Neighborhood...
You looked at Goal 1. I think you mentioned Goal 1.
Yep.
And so when you read through Goal 1, you saw the part about how the Planning Commission was actually a part of that community planning. So that was, for the City of Gladstone, Goal 1, that's the community involvement, is us, the Planning Commission. And so that's, paid for by the city committee or commission. I think what you're trying, my personal opinion of what you want to do, I think is great, and I think it would be welcome. I just, some discussion has to be done about how that would be set up. I know, Tammy, don't we have groups of people that do like cleanups and, they have regular things that the city doesn't have to pay to sponsor, but...
Like up at the nature park and the salt program and all of that.
So you guys have seen some of the stuff at the nature. I mean, they have done so much work up there. It's phenomenal the amount of work they've done, and then they come to the city council meetings and do regular reports, and I, in my mind, that would be a way to start. I mean, it's something to think about. A way to start is to get your group together and have some meetings, and then anytime you want to come to the planning commission or city council, you just simply ask to be put on the agenda. We have 2 city council members here tonight that I mentioned, that 1 or 2 might be here, and that's kind of why they're here, is they're liaisons from the city council, the planning commission, so they're listening to everything that you say and I say, and again, I'm not going to go on and on, but thank you so much for doing the work, and I hope that you do put together an organization.
So a couple things that I would like to point out. So I like the idea, and I also like the idea that the group could send representatives to Planning Commission to represent the group as a whole. I like that idea as well. I think that it would be worthwhile to work with the city, Jackie or whatever, to make sure that there's a page on the city for the contact details for the group, that your meetings are on the city's calendar so people can find it, and that your meeting minutes are also posted on the city just like our minutes are. I think all 3 of those would be a really good way to make sure it's tied into the city and people can find it when they're looking for it.
So, couple thoughts, and sometimes I maybe talk too fast and forget a few things. So, the primary focus is providing input to the Planning Commission on proposals, right? So, this a neighborhood association, a community planning organization, kind of they can be the same thing. Neighborhood associations tend to be in formal cities. CPOs tend to be in unincorporated parts of Clackamas County, but then Oregon City has a whole different model. So really what our ask is, because again, it's not just about us and our group, is that the city sponsor a task force, and that could be citizen-driven or whatever mechanism the city uses to put a task force together to really look into the details. How many do you have? Is there appetite within the community to do this? What are the, what kind of bylaws would you develop? What kind of needs would you have? So I'm feeling like there's more legwork to be done. I mean, it doesn't have to be exhaustive, but there is some more legwork that needs to be done to really make this work. And while I've lived here for a long time, I will admit, I don't know what the history within the city of Gladstone beyond the Planning Commission if neighborhood associations were ever tried and failed. In the comprehensive plan, which I think is, goes from state land use Goal 1 to the comprehensive plan, and then you might have a citizen involvement committee. Were things tried, and for lack of interest from community members, we really didn't go different ways. In talking, there's a state community involvement group, a volunteer group. I think they're land use attorneys that help residents across the state put together citizen involvement related to land use Goal 1, and it's very scalable. Some cities, planning commissions take on this role whole part and parcel because there aren't enough people to do anything more. Other cities will have the full-blown web pages, 20 or 30 neighborhood associations that are very active, and I think it's finding the sweet spot or the one that really works for Gladstone. And I will say we don't know what that is, and I don't think you should ask or rely on us to know what that is. I think there should be a group of people that look into that further.
Well, what I've seen in the last couple of years here, whenever there's a new apartment complex going in, that local community tends to gather together pretty quickly. We haven't really heard from them outside of that venue, right? Outside of the apartment complex, whether it's that one or another one, like it's happening pretty much every apartment complex that's going in. We never really hear from that group again. So I don't know whether they continue to exist or whether they dissolve.
Yeah, those, so each in, like, using ours as a case in point, it rose and it fell, if you want to call it that, or diminished because of the need. And I think what we're trying to think about is something that's long-term and sustainable and legitimate rather than just grassroots interests. So, in other words, something that really will be a benefit in a long-haul sort of way that is seen by the city as a legitimate entity, rather than just a bunch of people who have an issue or an interest.
I mean, I can't speak for the city councilors back there, but from my perspective, if a group of citizens want to get together and represent themselves as a group, that is legitimate. It doesn't matter what neighborhood they want to be, they're from or whatever, but, if they're trying to show that they have a common interest and present that to the city, whether it's us or council or whatever, that's legitimate.
I have a couple of questions. As you formulated this idea in your minds, do you have any sense of how many of these you would be looking at in the city of Gladstone?
So in talking to folks, I think that's where the to be determined.
Okay.
You could have one, which maybe doesn't make sense. You could have maybe 3 or 4. I think you have as many as there is energy and appetite to support, because again, it's supported by the citizens, those community members.
I had another question, and it relates to Mr. Early's comment about wasn't sure of the history. I'm sorry, maybe it was yours. I live in the Charlotte Heights neighborhood on the east side of Webster Road, and when we moved in there, they had neighborhood covenants. That organization, that neighborhood was built by the Lundgren family, and they expired, I think, in 2001. And it would seem to me that would have had to have been something that was done through some kind of an initial neighborhood association. I may be wrong about that, but it's hard to imagine just willy-nilly that those things entered into the paperwork you signed when you bought the house. And a couple that I remember is you couldn't have a basketball hoop on the over the garage, and you had to use either for roofing, it either had to be tile or cedar shake shingles, one of those two. No composition roofs allowed. Of course, that's all gone now. But and I don't know what the genesis of that was, whether it was neighborhood association or builder-driven or what the issue was. And would these associations, for want of a better term, with these neighborhood associations, would they consider covenants for neighborhoods that they were in?
Just in the research that I've done, again, and it's been limited, no, that's their purpose is really to look at activities that come to the Planning Commission as they're formed in response to State Land Use Goal 1, and they perform the function that the Planning Commission does now for public involvement. So if you have a proposal from a developer, this community planning organization could invite the developer to a CPO meeting. The developer and the community could have a more in-depth conversation that if the the logistics here don't necessarily enable that. Then the CPO would pull together the comments, and I've asked questions about, well, you're not all going to agree. How do you address, if you have varying comments? So those are all the kind of details that have to be worked out. But then those comments are provided to the planning organization. That's the function under State Land Use Goal 1. I don't think they get into any of the kind of building restrictions in the neighborhood. And then again, as time permits, they do get into other things to keep that sense of community and neighborhood fed throughout the year when there really isn't a lot of planning activity.
So we recently attended a training session about planning, and one of the things that was brought up was specifically what you just said about having the citizens meeting with the developers without us being present.
Oh, what did they say?
And so that was something that was encouraged for us to look into starting to do. So along those lines, I think that is something in line with what the city has been requested to do.
But we can't meet with, like, say that Brian Early wants to build his apartments again, which is a possibility. We can't meet independent of a public meeting. That's why I wanted you guys to come to this public meeting tonight, so that it's all on record and it's all part of, the state's idea of public meetings and land use. So, I think that'd be great if you guys could put together a group like that. I think that's what you should do, but it couldn't be paid for by the city, as far as I can tell.
Now, there is one cost to the city that would exist probably, and that would be for the ArcGIS system. We would probably want an overlay that shows where the individual groups are. That would allow the city to, say, send a mailing to that group, for example, or to select which groups are affected by a specific development, things like that. So Oregon City has a certain cost they charge us to do an extra layer like that, and it should just be one layer, but that is a cost for the councilors to note that would be involved. And
there's a lot of logistics, like you said, and I know you guys are going to be working on that. And, do you have questions, Natalie, that you want to ask?
Not right now. I'm just thinking a lot. I can see where this could be beneficial, but we definitely need to sit down and hammer out, not necessarily responsibilities, but kind of what the process would be, so that we could work effectively together.
Yeah, we would. I know the Planning Commission would work with you guys, absolutely. But I think, that we couldn't meet with you over a development.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think what's important for us, and maybe I didn't say it, is for this to work well, I think it needs to be a city-sponsored thing, right? So I'm not talking about bringing your checkbook. I'm saying ultimately the city it'd be great if the city comes out and says, hey, we think community and citizen involvement is important to the values of our community. We're wanting to explore what enhanced citizen involvement looks like in the planning forum. We're going to form a task force if you're interested in participating. This task force could then work through all of those details. What kind of resources are needed? Do you need help for the website? What are the boundaries? What kind of information would you need? What are we going to go ask this task force to do, so when they do come back, that we're not playing the wrong rock syndrome, because there's nothing worse than that, right? So you're getting what you need so you can make a decision, or whoever the decision makers are. Because I'll just admit for myself, when I was making phone calls as just a simple resident, I didn't always get answers from people. I think having the weight and the importance of the city behind this just sets it to a whole different level, and says it's important to you as the government of the city that we're going to explore this, and then someone gets to make the decision, whether it be you or the city council. I don't know who ultimately gets to make that decision, but it would be, I think, Randy, changing the paradigm of who implements State Land Use Goal 1 on the citizen involvement side, and so that, I think.
So the city council has the authority to create those groups.
Okay, the
and
task
to
force?
The task force, and have them started up. We can make recommendations as to what we think needs to be done or who should be involved in it. We could have somebody from our group involved in it, but it will be city council that would be creating that group if it's to be created.
And that's, those are the kinds of logistics I don't understand. Yeah,
Well,
so-
we do have to think about, because you mentioned like land use decisions. Right now, the planning commission makes quasi-judicial decisions. You read that training manual I gave you, I trust. If you want to look stuff up, that's a good place to look it up. So short of reworking everything in the way that the city of Gladstone does land use planning, I don't think that's what you're asking,
Yeah,
right?
Oh, no.
You just, what you're asking is a city sanctioned like task force of some sort. And I think if, the city council members that we have here tonight will be thinking about what you said. I will be. Our city planner, who's expert at a lot of stuff, will also think about that, and her wide experience will be greatly appreciated. And Tammy will be thinking about what you said when she talks to our city administrator about what you guys are thinking about. And as we go down the road, I'm sure it'll be refined much, much more.
Have you sat down with your group and figured out like what your mission would be? I mean, what would your purpose be to assist the city of Gladstone with any kind of input? If you have some kind of structure of what you're thinking about, that's something we could look at and see how it will mesh with what is at task for the planning commission to do, so we're not doubling our work.
Right.
Have you guys sat down and figured that stuff out?
So we've talked about it, but again, I'm hesitant because it's the we, and it's not the global Gladstone we, right? So while we may be really interested in it, I'm curious as to what the rest of the community feels about it. The focus of community planning organizations, as I understand them, is to provide input to the planning body on planning activities, and it's bounded by whatever codes and regulations that the planning commission. So we can't tell you to paint it blue if you can't tell a developer to paint it blue.
Yeah.
So those are the bookends, and that's really the starting point. And so it's about citizen involvement in the planning activities.
And I think that's a good place to start. So let's start there, and we'll all think about.
Let me make a comment to Natalie's question that when you talk about the group, this really is a transcendental consideration outside of that group. It's really, I guess you might say, as we were discussing this with, and what's the gentleman's name?
Joseph Itch.
Yeah, so he from Jennings Oak Lodge, and he's helping us to see what they do and going, wow, that sounds great. This is good stuff. I mean, we ought to have this in Gladstone. It's not about the agenda that our group originally had. This is more holistic about the community and how to embrace a paradigm that would help us as citizens to be a part of the process in a healthy and hopefully helpful way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we all need to sit down and kind of figure out what we think that looks like. Yeah.
Good.
Because I know that with Oak Grove, Oak Lodge area, they don't have, they're unincorporated, so they are totally citizen-based in the groups and the organizations they have, as where we are an actual incorporated city. So a lot of what we do, we're going to have to figure out how we can actually benefit each other and work together, because we are given very specific tasks as to what we're supposed to do. So I can see why that's something they do, and they do very well in the Oak Grove area, because you look at their library board and the other groups and committees, and they're very well organized. Yeah.
I think we are too. In Gladstone, we're thankful to have a good library board and all the citizen involvement that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So, with
thank you for the time. We appreciate you.
Thank
you're
you.
very welcome.
Thank you both
for doing that.
By the way, I'd like to comment on how well I thought you had organized and ran the group in regards to the issues you brought before, not only the Planning Commission, but City Council. It was done extremely well.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it was the group. It
Yeah.
really was.
It was done very well.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
So next on our agenda is municipal code change proposals. And this is a legislative action, and it's really, in my mind, it's part of the public hearing. And so I just want to read a little bit about legislative hearings before we start, if that's okay. The purpose of a hearing is to receive public testimony on matters of public policy, such as proposed plans, plan updates, and land use regulations such as zoning, design review, and land division regulations. So on our agenda tonight, we're going to have code changes. The proposals apply to a broad class of properties and people rather than determining individual rights. Hearings on legislative matters are less formal than a quasi-judicial hearing because the rights of individuals are not involved. It's development of policy rather than application of policy to individuals and individual or a few properties. So in our case, we're going to listen to what you guys have put together, and we'll make a recommendation to the City Council, who will vote and implement those changes. So we're here tonight to have a public hearing, and I guess we don't have anybody that's going to speak. It doesn't look like. And part of that hearing involves potential conflicts of interest. And I want to start out by saying that I have a potential conflict of interest. And what that involves is there's two types of conflicts of interest. An actual conflict of interest as defined in ORS 244.0201 and potential conflict of interest as defined in ORS 244.02012. In brief, a public official is met with a conflict of interest when participating in official action which could or would result in financial benefit or detriment to the public official, a relative of the public official, or business in which either is associated. So in my case specifically, I own rental property in Gladstone. So as we're discussing some of the fees or, you know, fines and stuff like that, that could affect me financially. So with a potential conflict of interest, since none of this stuff today is going to affect me financially, following the public announcement which I just made, the public official may participate in official action on the issue that gave rise to the conflict of interest. Does that sound reasonable? Did I do all the right stuff?
Yeah.
So does any other commission member have a potential or an actual conflict of interest they want to report before we start to hear testimony from our city officials?
I do not.
I do not. No more than anybody else who lives here.
Yeah. Only a
No, I would
resident.
be in Commissioner Malakai's position.
All right. We're ready to go.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, my name's Jeff Jolly. I'm the Chief of Police with Gladstone Police Department. I'm going to let my partner introduce himself, and he's going to give a brief history as to how we got to this point.
Sean Boyle. I'm the Community Service Officer for the City of Gladstone. That kind of boils down to code enforcement. Brief history on this is that this originally kind of came to light in 2016 during some, let's see, what was the word I had here in the memo I wrote, some town hall meetings that had occurred at the direction of the council. Councilors held multiple town hall meetings, and throughout several of those town hall meetings in 2016, citizens that attended sent a clear message to City Council that they wanted more code enforcement. They wanted more or tougher rules on the books, but at the same time they weren't very specific. So at some point thereafter, the council directed the police department to come up with several code change proposals. Since I am in code enforcement, that assignment was given to me. And basically I put forth a bunch of proposals for some code changes that addressed complaints that had been received by the city over the years. Since 2014 I've been in this code enforcement position. We don't have any logs on, hey, in 2004 I had 6 complaints on this particular issue. We don't keep track of that stuff. This was just kind of a general reflection on what citizens were upset about when they contacted me to complain about something, and I told them that we weren't able to assist them. So we came up with the ones that were seemed to be the most significant. We drafted some code change proposals. Those were submitted to City Council. We had a handful of those that were approved and signed into law, including a graffiti ordinance. There's some park rules changes that we actually didn't champion. But then as we started getting into some of the more difficult or challenging codes, it was recommended that we shelve that. Then subsequently, in like the last 2 months, council's been more interested in it, and they have requested that this be submitted to you for you to review and have additional input on. So as if you read the memo that I attached to the documents that we had previously submitted to the council, we aren't championing these because we want them. It's because this was what citizens were telling us. And so we reviewed codes from other agencies, other cities, and tried to cherry pick what we thought was best for Gladstone. But we're not set in stone on these ideas. We're open to change. We made modifications to some of the ordinance proposals that council did approve, and so we're just looking to have better rules to define what the community standards are going to be for Gladstone. And so that's, I guess, it was ultimately your assignment for you to review these, come up with any changes or recommendations, and then go to council for further action.
Good.
So I took a few notes, but there is one thing I would like to say up front that affects quite a few places in here. And I'll start it off with a little bit of an anecdotal thing that happened a couple months ago when I contacted the city. So, we had the new utility bill go out, and I received it, and I sent the check that exact same day, and that made it 2 days late. So the reason I bring this up is because there are quite a few places in here where the number of days that we allow on a mailing is 3, 5, 9, or 10 days. And that's not sufficient. If we're going to be sending mailings to people, giving them deadlines to do things, we have to give them enough time that they can get it and respond. So I'm going to make a blanket suggestion that anytime we're sending postal mail, especially since we're not paying for overnight or anything like that, right? Anytime we're sending postal mail, we should make it like a 30-day, not arbitrary, 5, 9, 3, whatever. Just a straight 30-day anytime we're using postal mail, because not all of these mails are local. Some of them, like mine, go to South Dakota, right? So by the time it gets there, I see it, and then I send back a response. It's already past the date. In some of these it says that, after 3 days, they don't even have the letter by then. And in some of these cases, we're talking about putting a warrant out for their arrest if they don't get it and respond in time. So
I don't recall there being any warrant for
I
arrest
did
in any
flag
of
it,
the
so we'll
proposals.
see it when we get there. But I just wanted to make this as a blanket thing up front that if it involves postal mail, we should make it like a certain date length, just so that people aren't getting the letters too late to respond.
Yeah, and like I said, we're completely open to changes. At this point, this is these proposals are for you to modify, make recommendations to council to
Right.
make for.
I only mentioned that one because
that's fine.
there's so many
Yep.
places in there.
So
that talk
did
about
you
mail.
did you have a model that you use for the times? Because I know on a couple of those things like the vacant houses.
So that one was actually, I don't know where we borrowed that from. I think that Lieutenant Fryette
I want to say Salem, but
crafted that. It might have came from Salem. And when it comes to the vacant buildings, that one actually probably needs some additional scrutiny because Oregon recently enacted the law, the state did, that requires some notification. So there could be potential for some conflicting language with the state law requirements. So we'd want to just bring that into the same line as what the state is requiring. So yeah, those things, I think those came from like this one, we couldn't find a lot of local places that had similar. Salem was a good model. Portland had some things, but not the same. And then there's some other cities that they have these grand programs, but then there's nothing to fund it, so they don't really exist at all in the end of the day. So yeah, I don't have any information I can provide you on the vacant buildings, because I did not actually do that one.
Are you a sworn peace officer?
I am not.
Okay. I was just curious about that. Doesn't matter.
I have a question. You mentioned borrowing from other locales, which I think is just fine. If somebody else has a good idea, why not use it if it's not copyrighted? But generally, how would you say your recommendations line up with the codes in Westland, Oregon City, Milwaukee, Happy Valley, our surrounding communities? Are we sticking out like a sore thumb with anything? Or are we missing anything?
I would say that our current codes are deficient in comparison to other communities currently, and that the proposals, we're not making any leaps like to the top of the ladder here.
Right.
You know, we're trying. I mean, what works in Lake Oswego is not going to work here. What works in West Linn is not going to work here. But yeah, did we take some elements of some of their codes and use them to craft these? Certainly do, because you know, we've identified that these might be problem areas for this community, and it's really well written there, so we certainly did borrow from those other places. But even our proposals aren't as strict as some of the other ones in other communities.
And that's a good point, if I may, Commissioner Smith. So to back up a little bit, we have advocated at every step along the way that a total code revision be conducted. The last time a major overhaul was done, I believe, was 1995. I think the internet's been invented since then and a couple other things. So we're grossly out of line with updating it. This was a Band-Aid approach that we were directed to do. So the entire code is in need of overhaul.
So do you want to go through this, like, start with vacant buildings, and do you want to present anything as we go through this? We were discussing earlier what the best way to go through this would be without, you know, trying to rewrite every piece of text and everything.
I personally think our best bet is just go through one page at a time, and if anybody has comments on it, then they can address those comments.
Would you guys mind sitting there while we go through this?
No, that's fine.
We don't have to read the whole thing, just maybe on each page see if people have comments.
Why don't you go ahead and start that?
Okay, so we'll start on page 4.1. The comment, the B17060XX thing, I just had a question here. So this section seems to be more vague than the 479 you have at the back. So in the back, you talk about things that are exempted.
So on 4.1, those were some last-minute additions, just as some options from planning, just so that we are encompassing everything. So we wanted to get in a planning input, and so that's why that's there. So it's the 1706, the membrane fabric structures. That's something that could exist in different parts of the code, and so as a last minute, we had Melissa provide some input on how that would look in Chapter 17 as opposed to, say, Chapter 8 nuisances.
Okay.
And so, and again, this is all flexible.
Yeah.
We're not, I mean, I'm not...
I wasn't so much concerned about the section it's in, so much as on page 479, you explain in detail, like, your kid's tent isn't included, right?
4.1's not mine.
So I was just
So I cannot
wondering,
comment.
if we do this section, are those things going to be as obvious?
If you want to put them in there, you can.
Okay. So if we do this section, I want it to be more obvious, like in the back.
I can provide direction too on where this came from. So we went through all of the recommended nuisance codes that came from Sean and the police department, and citizen, it sounds like, background and involvement, and kind of picked out things that may be appropriate to include in Title 17, which is going to be the standard of review for the land use approvals. So if it's somewhere else in the municipal code, it's not going to be able to be enforced as part of our approval from a planning perspective. So to ensure consistency through the city, those were our recommendations. So for instance, for membrane structures, we pulled that definition from the ordinance that's referenced in here. But there's, I mean, certainly if you want it more detailed, that's
Yeah, because my concern was that this description seems to prevent things like covering your firewood or having kids camp in your backyard.
Well,
and I know that's not the intention per the back of the section.
That was not, I mean, it
In the other
clearly
section.
says in, that you can cover your boat as long as it makes contact.
An individual
And,
item,
you know, it was totally different than a membrane structure, which would be a frame with a membrane on it. I think that's pretty spelled out in the...
Well, so this section isn't as spelled out as it is in the back. That was my point. And I just want to make sure that we're not losing that, the exemptions that are defined in the back.
Right, and for clarity too, any changes to Title 17 are kind of going to move separate from the rest of these nuisance updates, so they would have to come back with a staff report and kind of move on a separate path to go to City Council. So we're just going over them here, and we provide this memo for the context of how they're going to be carried out in Title 17, but we can certainly make changes to them and then bring all of that back in a, Title 17 changes package.
Okay.
And there's also corresponding recommended changes to the enforcement provisions in there, which kind of accompany this whole and bigger picture we can talk about after. So that's kind of the planning side of all of this and why we're here. But there's definitely more time and opportunity to modify that and make it more specific, so we can look at that.
Does that satisfy what you were...
Anything else on this page?
Yes, I have a question relating to recommendation C, where it says establishing procedures to notify property owners of Title 17 zoning and development code violations. How about, what's a reasonable time to do that in? And I think that sort of...
Establish the procedures or to notify?
To notify somebody that there's an issue with their vacant building.
Well, I think the Chapter 17 is more just all-encompassing all violations of Chapter 17.
Okay.
And so it's not just vacant building, that's anything in Chapter 17.
Okay. So we wouldn't need some kind of a broad brush date for notification that applied to this?
Melissa and I have been talking, and we're looking like 30 days, is kind of the starting point.
Okay.
Daycare or remedy those. I mean, you obviously want to have some sort of flexibility. I mean, if you got a serious life, hazard situation, you don't want to be waiting. You don't want to have, we're locked for 30 days because that's what the code says.
Okay.
So there are going to be some instances where you're going to want to have some flexibility. But your general zoning, Chapter 17 violation, 30 days to comply,
Perfect.
I think is what we're kind of looking for.
That's outlined too in this planning staff memo that was handed out today, and sorry for the late notice on that. Kind of stepped in and tried to do all these quickly to meet this meeting deadline, but that corresponds to what's described here in C, A, and B. So this is the actual underline of recommended or suggested text edits that will identify procedures for the notification and the timeline of the 30 days and when fines would kick in.
And that's 30 days, not just business days. It's
Business
weekends
days.
included.
Mhm.
Business days, because it doesn't say.
I didn't say that in here because the entire code, it doesn't specify. It's just business days is how it's always been treated from a precedent standpoint, but we could certainly add that in if
I think
that's
it needs
a suggestion.
to.
Okay.
Yeah. Business days, not Saturday and Sunday, but Monday through Friday. Yeah.
Anything else on page 1?
No, I do not.
Ready? No. Page 2, you ready? 4?
4 is just kind of a recap of all the stuff that's in the chapter. So I have one on 5.
Okay, go ahead.
Solid waste, number 2, and this happens to be one that's kind of in my neighborhood. We have a guy who's in the tree business, and we literally have logs piled in the yard for months. And I'm wondering if there's something that could be added to describe that
I
type
saw
of...
that somewhere, logs piled up.
So the,
Lumber and woods on number 3.
producible and non-producible waste is gonna cover that.
Is that going to cover that? Perfect.
Could you clarify what is street refuse?
I'm
On
sorry,
number
what'd you
2.
say?
Number 2 says street refuse.
Anything you swept up out of the street?
Yeah, I can't recall, you know, some of this research was done a year ago or more, so I can't recall, where that came from, or what.
So as the person enforcing it, what would you consider that to be?
Oh, let me read this here. And I would probably have to go look back at my notes. I think it's any refuse that came from the street.
So like people's trash in their
So if
cars?
someone's
or
trash
anything?
was in the street and it flew up into your yard, I mean, unfortunately, you're responsible for taking care of that thing.
Cigarette butt.
Yeah.
I did
Multiple
have some concerns about number 3, specifically about the cars. You know, when I was a kid, I remember having a car in our driveway that I worked on for a while and built it up. You know, obviously I didn't build it within 90 days. And this seems like it prohibits that kind of action.
No, if someone's if there's visible action occurring, something like this section is not going to apply.
Okay, so what...
Right. So so under the current language, previous ruling by another judge is that we had to have multiple elements. Was what was described in the current language for it to be for us to enforce that. And we're just trying to make it a little bit easier to that. If we have a vehicle that's sitting there, clearly no one's working on it, and we have this expired registration on the top of that, we're just trying to build the building blocks to take enforcement action. If someone's working on a car and you can see that they're working on the brakes this week and next week they're working on something else and they don't have the registration, well, they're clearly working to go to take action on that.
Okay.
You know, this line of questioning is very similar to the rules about like alcohol in the park or other types of rules that the city already has on the books. While it is true that someone who takes a bottle of beer down to the community garden to use as slug bait in their garden is technically violating the rules, the reality is that rule has been on the books well before my time, and that has never happened. And so you gotta, I mean, just because there is this possibility, worst case scenario, something like this can happen, we can apply that standard to everything, and then we might as well not have any rules. Sometimes there's got to be a trust that training and education and experience is going to have a role that for something like that for a citation to be issued for someone who's clearly working on a vehicle, there's going to have to be a failure at the code enforcement level. There's going to have to be a failure at my supervisor's level, at the chief level, at the judge's level. I mean, you know, just because someone receives a citation doesn't mean they're necessarily guilty. They can go to court and plead their case. The judge is very reasonable. She's found against me in some cases, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, and when we're looking at fines, some of these are Class A infractions, $720 base fine, and there has been requests from some people to reduce those, and the judge has always fought against those. And the reason is because under the city code, she has the authority to use that full spectrum as far as the fine is concerned. So when we're talking about a Class A $720 fine, a good example of that would be drinking alcohol in public is a Class A violation. And when we write those, first appearances in court, I've seen her reduce them to $50, $75 depending on history. But at the same time, if we got that, if we have a person who has a history, is clearly not learning their lesson, it gives her a little bit more authority to have some flexibility in how she's administering the justice.
So when it comes to nuisance codes, we're not looking at opportunities to misapply the law or get away from intent. We're looking at the citizen who lives next door to somebody who has the car on the front lawn with 2 missing tires and wheels and no engine, and the code guy comes out there and says, will you fix this? And 2 weeks later he puts 1 tire on there, and then he rotates that tire to the other side. That's what we're trying to prevent, is because there's cars that are sitting around here with no engines in them. People can't be working on them.
Okay.
Yeah, there's just some that are clearly evident that work's not being done.
They're just sitting there taking up space,
Yes.
being ugly looking.
And the 80420, and I admit fully this one is something that I struggle with. The comment about allowing to remain upon the property. So I'm in a situation where I telecommute. So I go outside like once a week or whatever. And usually I'm just always in my house. Whenever I go outside, there's like 4 or 5 newspapers in my driveway that I have to throw away that's been sitting there in the rain because I've told them 3 times not to deliver them, and they do it anyway. What recourse do we have as citizens to, they're littering in our yards, right? And according to this, we're the ones at fault, right? What recourse do we have to prevent them, or to tell them that they're not legally allowed to do that?
We can certainly address that, but I think the purpose of tonight's meeting, and just then to take into consideration everyone's time, that we should focus on the actual proposed code changes.
Right.
And if you want to contact me after the fact, talk about 804, 020 scattered rubbish, where there's no code change proposal, we can have a discussion about that. We certainly can. I think the purpose of tonight's meeting is to address the actual proposed code changes.
Okay.
Right, that was going to be my question. We're just reviewing the red stuff, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as they had mentioned, we've been talking
good.
about how we needed to do updates to the code. So I was reviewing everything that was presented to
Yes,
us.
I hear you.
So, anything else on this page, guys?
I live on a street where people walk on the sidewalk and they throw their garbage in my yard. I just go out and pick it up.
Put away.
Because they litter in my yard.
Nope. Anything on 6?
I had nothing. I don't think we have any proposed changes until page 10.
Yep.
If we go back to page 6, just, I do have one question, and it may be addressed here under a different term, but how about chemicals, or say motor oil stored just in a jug or a bucket?
DEQ, that's kind of their area of expertise.
Okay.
I've had some complaints in the past where someone's changing their oil, they have a gravel driveway, there's some large oil stains there. I've reached out to them multiple times, contacted them, and they have no interest in it unless it's large scale, and they told me that the small scale stuff is not a problem. So unless it's draining into the sewer system, there's no real reason to take any
Be
enforcement
involved.
action.
Okay.
Do we have anything before 10 then? No?
No, I didn't have anything.
You have something?
Nope.
Yeah, I'm trying to narrow it down because I did have comments on things that were not redlined. There are some concerns I had in here, like the 804-144 is actually not legal.
804-1.
Radio and
Yeah,
television?
that's for another day. We've requested a overall complete
I understand.
code review. I mean, if you
Yeah.
look at these and look at some of the dates that these were enacted, that one in particular, 1984, and then there's some that goes back to the 1950s.
But we're not going to try and change any of those as part of this.
Our assignment was not to do that. That's a much grander scale. It's going to take the entire city council to take action on that. I'm a resident of Sherwood. They did that, accomplished that a few years ago. They had a real aggressive timeline, and it took like 3 years to get that done. So it's not an easy overnight thing. We're simply addressing the complaints from those town hall meetings in 2016.
Okay.
So this is a quick way to get some changes done without having to try to go through and rewrite the whole municipal code, which is gonna take forever. That'd be a good thing for the citizen.
804-144, that's never been enforced since as long as I've been here, so it's, I mean...
So on page 11, one of the red line items, C, I wanted to get clarification on that because my reading of it, it does seem like it would prevent vans or pickup trucks on my neighbor's property since it would block my view. I don't think that's the intention.
This was several complaints. It's a pretty hot topic. I regularly get calls about where people are parking vehicles in their yard, in the front grass.
Yeah.
And so that's the target from those complaints.
Is there something that we need to do to clarify that that doesn't apply when it's, because on E it says when it's on the concrete or driveway. So it seems like C and E together is saying that that vehicle can't be parked in the driveway.
No, that's the exception.
Oh, I see.
So if it's in the driveway, it can be in the front part of the property. It's
Okay.
just we're trying to establish that, hey, the driveway's fine, it's where the grass should be.
Okay. Anybody else have comments on 10 or 11? Next changes are on 24. Any comments?
No, it seems pretty clear to me.
26.
And we would be supportive if you were to decide to ask the council to review and change and look at the entire code. That would be great. You would
Yeah,
have
I've
our
got
support.
about 10 times as many comments as I'm mentioning, so.
And I think that they want to, but with everything, as you know, that we're, as a city, all the stuff that we're involved in right now. All those guys are...
Sorry. As a quick side note, too, DLCD recently contacted us. I guess there's been funding that was approved in the last, which was the short session. I'm sorry, I was trying to find the words. The last short session approved additional budget for some type of local government assistance programs, which may include a code audit provision. We're trying to coordinate with DLCD and to do some background research on our end from the planning side to help maybe inform a decision we might make to go after some of that. So stay tuned for information on that. We're still looking into it.
It's an arduous process.
May not encompass, all of these sections of the code that are not in the zoning and land use arena, but I'll fill you in more as we go along, and any code update would be helpful, it sounds like, too, for the city. So.
Anything on 29?
Oh, I like the change.
30? And just for your reference, page 35 was the one I mentioned that would have the warrant if they didn't skip the letter in time.
35 what section?
What's that?
Which part?
So page 35, which is not code change here.
Right.
The top part is talking about a warrant if they do not respond to the letter within 14 days, which is actually 9 days after their 5-day. So it's 5 days before you send the letter, then 9 days later.
What's the code number?
The very first paragraph on page 35.
So it's 10.04.470.
So that was the one that caught my attention about that, because it's 5 days, then we send a letter.
It says a warrant for arrest will not be issued.
Oh, will not be issued.
Yeah.
That helps. Thank you.
Yep.
Good.
Yay! We don't want any warrants.
So I think these examples that you put in the packet of the cars is pretty explanatory of what you meant by abandoned vehicles, and I think a reasonable person would agree with with you.
They were good
I agree.
pictures, yeah.
I thought it was pretty
Like,
clear.
this is a no. Can't do that.
Those are abandoned, and, you know, if the tires are half flat and the tags have been expired for 3 or 4 years, pretty given that
Mm-hmm.
probably gonna sit there until it falls apart.
Sound like that needs
They
to be
can.
towed.
So the next change is on 63.
Yep.
So number 1 and number 2, the first part of number 2 is exactly the same as number 1, and I don't know if that was intentional or not.
Yeah, it looks like it was unintentional.
Anything else on page 63?
Uh,
1 and 2,
number
it looks
one
like
and
it was
two.
just repeated.
The opening sentences are the
basically
same.
Same thing as number 1. In the
Yeah,
beginning.
they're the same. Number 2 has a little bit more, so.
On number 64, a couple paragraphs under number 4, you mentioned local was within 30 miles. I was curious, was that arbitrary, or is there a reason 30 miles was chosen for local?
I think that might have just came from Salem, or there was Hillsborough also has a vacant building, so that we didn't have any reason to change it. So, but we're not locked into it either. So
Okay.
it was just
I was looking around us to see where that line was, and so Banks and Yamhill and McMinnville Airport are like right at that line. Salem's like 8 miles outside that line. So I was just trying to understand if there was a reason for that specific line. So
yeah. No, we didn't. Like you said, we just borrowed this. We didn't have any specific intention. You know, the idea is that we've had some problems with making homes in the community, and so we're just trying to find some way to deal with them.
Have we had a lot of squatters in some of those vacant homes?
We have. Lately, we've been really lucky that we haven't. You know, so we've had, you know, good neighbors calling in, so we're able to make sure that they can't set up camp, where we're able to get them out of there before they've, you know, squatted on the premise. So, but we've had some in the recent history.
Our lieutenant made a watch list of vacant homes, and we try to keep that updated so the officers can aggressively watch those homes
Good.
that are vacant. The last time that we had to go through a process, it took nearly a year, a search warrant, and 20 cops to get the squatters out.
Yeah,
So
it
this-
creates a nasty problem. Okay.
under the definition of vacant, number 1, it says lack of building habitation or use, or abandonment of habitation or use. I think that last "or" there is supposed to be "and."
It's possible. It was Lieutenant Greg Fry had actually crafted this one, taking the information from Salem and I believe Hillsborough, maybe one other resource as well. So and we're completely open. We're not locked into anything. And again, this section here itself is going to need to be re-reviewed now with that state ORS that
Yeah.
has some
The
requirements. for
way it's written right now, if you no longer inhabit it, but you still use it, it's vacant. So if you make that an "and," then inhabiting it or using it makes it not vacant.
Right.
See, I wonder, it sounds like we may need to review this, and you may need some time to review this. Would this be a good one to revisit?
I mean, if there's going to be
Possibly,
changes, we can revisit.
Because if the substance of the law that guides us has changed, we need to take a look at it again, send it to our attorney.
Okay.
And that may give you some time to take a look and...
I think the timelines, as what was brought up in the beginning, 15 days, if somebody moves out of a, you know, building and there's no furniture in there for 15 days, that would make that a vacant building. And it would have to be registered under some...
On the flip side, I had a concern about people just moving in, like fresh out of high school or college, they move into a home, they've only got 15 days to buy furniture.
I don't think
I
that
don't
would
think it
ever...
would be vacant.
Yeah.
It's one
That
of those
wouldn't
common
be-
sense applications with the
Well,
intent of the law.
commonly, rental properties can be vacant from 30 to 45 days on the average.
Or a house being sold where the
turnaround.
owners have moved.
That's correct.
So,
But
you know, those things need to be...
I'm on the
looked at.
good faith side of the equation here. I don't think police department has any interest in rousting people in those kinds of situations.
Well, thank you. It's good to hear.
I mean, you've been on enough panels with me to know I try not to take into account the people we're dealing with today when we're looking at laws, right? Because they are not the people we're going to be dealing with later, right? So it's no dig on anybody, right? I try to look at this without any regard to who's enforcing it or who's using it or whatever, and try to just keep in mind that it's people agnostic, right? And so when I'm looking at this and making comments about that, we don't know who's going to enforce it down the road, right?
Oh, we get that. I just wonder, do you think that one would be a better one to come back?
I think
your next
so.
meeting?
I would.
I
Give
would
us
think
a
so.
chance, give you guys a chance
So what do you think?
That seems
That
fair
way,
and reasonable.
I mean, we're not wasting anyone's time in the sense that if it needs to be revised and updated with what she was talking about before we really seriously sit down and look at it, let's go ahead and do that first.
And we can package it with the Title 17 changes once
Exactly.
we kind of,
So
if there's any more
you
changes,
can
we have
identify
at the
the
end of the meeting and bring it back
per
with the staff
Title
recommendation.
17.
So
and
knowing that
report.
you're going to re-look at this and you're going to bring it back before us, I will suggest that you look at page 69 2B as part of that. Mailing something 3 days before it is not going to get it to the people in time. So again, anytime we talk about mail, I would suggest increasing the length of
Standard, no, I agree with you. But standard notice, like when you give a renter a notice and you drop it in the mail, that's 3 business days from the postmark that's put on that envelope. Whether you open it or not, that's your problem.
Well, I'm not talking about opening it, I'm talking about them actually getting it in time.
Well,
Is anything like that stated in Title 17 regarding
That's in
date?
accordance, though, with it being posted at
Sorry,
the
I
address.
missed the first part of the question.
And, if you look under Chapter 9, there's an abatement process in there, and, there's similar things. It's, we go out of our way. We mail it first class, we mail it certified, and then it's being also posted at the address. And so there's an element of, you need to be responsible as a property owner, this is your property, you should have some, knowledge of what's going on here, and, things are being posted there and being mailed. That's what I'm looking for. I'm not disagreeing with you.
So I do understand that.
Yeah.
But we do have people who are renting here, and the homeowners may not even live in this state. And the chances of them seeing something posted at the door is nil, right? They're not going to see it. They're not going to see anything posted locally.
state law is 3
Right.
days.
I mean,
What you do is you
if
mail
you're
it
gonna
and you post it.
if you're going to
So
mail it to them and tell them they have to be here before they get the letter, that's unreasonable,
you post it, what I do is I tape it on the door
which they
and
won't
I
see.
drop it in the mailbox. And if they
And
don't
the
see it,
abatements,
that's too bad.
after notice has already also been delivered, we don't jump straight to abatement, and that's the only notice you've ever had. There's going to be a warning notice posted and mailed prior to that. So there's the addition, and it's going to be mentioning that abatement's a possibility.
Yeah, all I'm getting at is, based on our own city's mailings not getting to me in time, and I live here, I don't think 3 days is enough. That's all I'm saying.
What I asked was, I was curious, in Title 17, since we're trying to mesh these together so
Right.
we're all abiding by the same rules, are there dates regarding those incidences that we need to follow by that are listed in 17?
Particularly for violations, enforcement
And,
actions.
well, for informing people that, like how many days?
They have to comply to remediate a violation.
Okay.
So the enforcement section in Chapter 17 is
yeah.
2 very slim paragraphs, or 3 very slim paragraphs. So you'll see in our recommended changes here,
Yeah.
we've linked Chapter 1.08 of the municipal code, which is that kind of general penalty section, which
Okay.
has more specific timing requirements. So Sean and I were coordinating on this. Sounds like in the past, and this might help too for background, there's been somewhat of a different procedure in terms of how zoning violations are enforced and how the rest of the municipal code violations are enforced.
Right.
County staff, also building code staff, enforces their building permits, and that's how it's set up in the IGA. Whereas planning staff, we're not responsible at all for any enforcement. It's all the city.
Right.
So we've been trying to figure out and work with Sean on how best to set it up in the code so that the police department can enforce it consistent mostly with how the rest of the municipal code violations are
I think that's
enforced.
a really good idea, yeah.
So that's why we've recommended these additions in here saying
2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
2
got
and
it.
3. So the city police chief, or his designee, has the option of using that chapter 1.08, the general penalty, which has specific timing requirements.
Okay.
In addition to that, we've also added 4 on here, which has timing requirements for when the notice of violation is sent out, which is gives the property owner 30 days from the date of the letter to comply or provide evidence the violation's been remediated. There's also a provision, C, that the city administrator in conjunction with police chief can determine there are no health and safety issues, and if the violator provides evidence that there are extenuating circumstances, they can add more time on.
Are you good with that?
I think it's important to have consistency with the dates. It's easier.
Yeah.
So
I'm okay with that.
Does anybody have any comments for them for the rest of that section? Going up to page 77.
The only comment I want to make is just, like a couple of those, looking at the pictures, I know where those houses are. And I know who used to live in them. And some of those are, I know one of the city councilors lives in a neighborhood where one of those houses has been empty for over 30 years, and I know the people that last lived there. And I think that, overall this is going to be something the city needs desperately to have. And if it's a little bit tough, I think it needs to be.
Yeah, I have 3 houses right across the street from me that are all empty and have been for years.
There's a few of them in town. All right.
Okay, so anything on page 77?
Yes. I'd like to ask about, should these buildings be tethered or attached as opposed to just sitting on poles? Well, it's not a full-size tethered building. If someone had one of these tent-like structures on their deck in an apartment building on Charlotte Way that last weekend in the weather, it was out in the street and blown off. And these things are nothing but giant sails when the wind catches them. And if they're not attached, they become a safety hazard, or a potential safety hazard. They may never do anything to anybody, but if they're tethered, they probably won't.
Well, generally, this proposal would just prohibit those in generally speaking, and so there would be no not necessity to tether it, but we could certainly add that for the ones that would be allowed. The other conversation to be having here is that this is kind of a 2-part issue when it comes to membrane structures, and the reason it's a 2-part issue is because there's not only this, community livability standard where we got these I call them tarp garages that deteriorate pretty quickly, start to fall apart, and then they just sit there in shambles. There's also the other component that has largely been overlooked over the years with regard to some of these are already in violation of the city code with regards to setbacks in the front building area of the properties. So that's something out there's also going to have to be some input from city manager, past city managers have decided that they don't want to enforce those, and so why that's particularly important is because no one wants to see the garbage tent garages that are out there. But if you go down West Dartmouth, 400 block, I believe, on the north side of the street, there's a very beautiful metal carport, if you will, and it's technically in violation of the setbacks. So
looks nice.
Yeah, but it looks nice. So I mean, that's a little bit additional things to take in consideration that some of these are already in violation of the city code. We'll just so whether this passes or not, there could be some potential changes as far as policy enforcement.
You said metal, so it's not a membrane. Is that correct?
Right, but it's
the setbacks is the issue.
Right. So it in and of itself, it would not be a violation of this because it's not a membrane structure, but the metal structure itself is a violation of the setback currently because it is a structure in that setback zone.
And I think, Gladstone, sadly, there's a lot of this stuff that's proliferated all over the place because nobody really wants to enforce any of the laws. Not you, but the city manager or whoever. And, you go through other communities and you just don't see the amount of garbage and, these crappy
Well, you're going to
temporary
find
structures.
some of that kind of triaging, if you will, of enforcement. Because even in Clackamas County, they have their county codes, and if you go to the website, even for their building codes, they have a matrix, and I think it's broken down into 4 or 5 categories, and they one's the most important, 4 or 5 is the least important. They've come out and said, hey, we're not enforcing these bottom categories. Even if they go out there in a higher priority level 1 violation, if they see a level 4 violation, they're not going to take enforcement action because they don't have time to enforce, they don't have staff to enforce that on a broad spectrum for the entire population. They're not saying that these are bad ordinances, they're saying they're good ordinances, we want to keep them on there, and at some point in the future maybe we'll have additional staff where we can address them, but at the current load, this is what we are taking action on. So
So do you think that you will start to enforce these as we get the new code?
not a decision for me to make.
And that's
Which
the
ones?
chief or
As far as the proposals under Chapter 8, any of those, Chapter 10, those are all going to be enforced. It's largely what's going to happen is it's mostly complaint driven because that's going to take up a majority of the time. But when there's downtime, complaints have already been addressed, then is what you're going to get is, there'll be some self-initiated enforcement.
We have enough resources to deal with complaint-driven complaints. So we can deal with that easily. And when there's free time, I'm confident that we can also handle that.
But if one of the neighbors, like Pat, for instance, calls and complains about his neighbor that has these membrane structures, you will enforce the code?
Yes.
if he calls.
Correct.
Yes.
I think it's only fair, I mentioned this to Officer O'Malley prior to the meeting, and it's a public record, I'm not talking out of school here, but one of the city councilors at the last meeting offered that, do we really need more regulations when we're probably not enforcing the ones we have already? So you may have an uphill battle with the city council in convincing them that that these will be enforced. And boy, I'll chat with a city administrator that says we don't need to enforce these.
That's not the problem here.
And that's not the current administrator's position. They're just, it's as far as some of those decisions that are made in the past with the current workload, the current state administrator has not had an opportunity to go back and review all those, hey, we're not doing this action. So no, those aren't current administration decisions, they're previous. And so eventually those will all be reviewed at some point. It's just a matter what's the priority is. So
Chairman Willette's comment about the proliferation of junk, for want of a nice generic term, it's a lot like graffiti. If you don't wipe it out, it just gets away from you.
Well, and that was our argument, and that was one I got passionate about,
Right.
Because I couldn't understand the common
Hey, I
sense
just
and the way
bought
the
a
direction that was
36-foot
going.
travel trailer, and 4 of my neighbors have them in their front yard. Why can't I? And that's the way it just goes and goes and goes.
I do have a question about that specific topic, actually, because I remember
Travel trailers at 36
there was something
footers,
about
for example.
graffiti that came before us a few months ago. I don't remember what it was, or that came before city council or something. And if I recall, somebody who was elderly had some graffiti on their property, and I'm wondering, for things like that, do we have, or can the city put on their website a list of resources to help people who are not going to be able to fix these problems on their own? Because we're going to give them a short duration, a short window to get these things fixed, but some people may not have any idea how to fix it or not be physically capable of fixing it.
We've partnered with the Senior Center. We gave them, they've created a list of resources. We provide them with our list of resources.
Yeah.
There's a list of resources. And when we encounter people that don't have the means, we do make those referrals.
Okay.
So it's, and we're not, blindly just writing tickets to people. There's a process. We make contact with these people. We attempt to make contact at the door. If they're not there, we post notice on the door and send it in the mail. And so, we have this very lengthy established process that we're going through. We often bend over backwards to help those people in the community, we don't get there. And again, at the end of the day, even if there's the failure on a grand scale, the judge is there to rein that in. I've had times where, no fault of mine or anybody else's in the process, we had reached a point where a citation had to be issued, but somewhere between the issuance of the citation and the appearance in court, the judge, the issue had been taken care of. Judge is finding her guilty, but dismissing all the fines. And and we also have a fix-it ticket program. So that just, there's a warning notice. You get a citation, and if you have so we're giving them we're giving them a notice that has a time frame to get into compliance. If they're not in compliance and there's been no good faith effort to remedy the problem, they get a citation. And if when they receive the citation, they get a notice that this is a fix-it ticket, and they have between the time of the issuance of the citation and the court date to remedy the problem. And if they remedy the problem, it's a $25 fix-it ticket fee, and then the judge will even go, hey, how much more time do you? Oh, you need 3 more weeks. Okay, done. So we're 3-4 months into the process by the time we're getting to those points. But every person in the process the goal is to get corrective action, not to write the ticket. And so that's what the goal is every time.
And specifically on the graffiti, we have 2 citizens interested in doing a volunteer removal with supplies that will be donated to them. And the Public Works Director, Jim Wynant, has already said that any time during the months when he has his pressure washer out, that he would be a second, if needed, resource.
Okay.
I don't envision any graffiti person getting fined.
You gotta catch them.
Unless they just say, we're not going to do it because we like what they wrote. I don't know. I can't.
May I ask a question? We may not always have all the staff that are here today together to raise this issue. Melissa, you mentioned earlier sort of who has the authority to enforce different parts of it. You raised the question at the very beginning whether Officer Boyle was a sworn officer or not. And I've heard citizens say that, if you're not a police officer, you can't always enforce or cite or some of these people for certain aspects of the law. And if things come under building code or setback violation, that's different from what a police code enforcement officer could do. I guess my question is, does the city administrator have the option of designating whoever he or she wants to have the power to enforce, so that Officer Boyle could really be the one to enforce a broader range of things than he is empowered to do right now? Does anybody know the answer to
So when it comes to enforcement and writing citations, basically the reality is that anybody technically can write an infraction violation. All right. If you see someone run a stop sign, you have the authority to go write them a ticket. All right. Now, getting there is a much different story to be told. It's going to be really challenging to ensure that, but it then becomes incumbent upon the citizen to, they have to go to court and they have to testify. And the officer is only the mechanism of actually physically issuing the citation at that point. So is where the authority lies is that sworn officers are the only people who can enforce crimes. All right, and so we do have crimes in our city code, and only officers can enforce them. Sworn police officers But when we're talking about parking or any other type of infraction, there are provisions in there where it says city manager or designee or something to that effect.
Or police chief or designee.
Correct.
So
And so those things, those provisions are in the code.
Kind of like the meter maid. you
Right,
know,
and
the
then there's
meter
one-
maid's
there's-
sworn, and they issue tickets that you have to pay nonetheless.
Correct. And then there's one provision in there that was recommended by the city attorney when we started these conversations almost 2 years ago, that he made the recommendation of, hey, someone had made a complaint and we're like, hey, the current language is sufficient, but to resolve this issue, we're going to make this general change here. And so that's one of the, it's in section 10 here somewhere, and no one had any comment on it, but that's where that is. And so, if you want to say
We double
unclear
down on that
language
one.
that was previously there's a recommendation to make it clear.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. So it sounds like you're wanting to give as broad as possible an authority to make sure that someone doesn't slip by saying that whoever cited me wasn't authorized to cite me.
Yeah, that's not going to be an issue anymore.
John can write those tickets.
That's helpful.
Sean has observed numerous crimes, a couple serious ones, including one recently where he helped solve that thing up on Jennings, where the guy, was it a hatchet or
Machete.
machete, and the other guy had it. That was Sean solving that. Well, he didn't go out and grab the guy and wrestle him to the ground, but he got officers there. So I
Good.
mean, that happens all the time. So
Good.
To piggyback on that really quick, just to help assist Sean in the zoning code violation enforcement, 'cause you can't really issue, like a parking ticket for a setback infraction or something. We've helped create a violation letter template,
I saw
which
that.
Sean will be using to kind of fill in the blank, and I can assist, somewhat. It's not in our contract to do the actual enforcement, but we can help isolate what zoning code they're in violation of, and then he can put that in the letter. So hopefully we're going to keep track of the violation by numbers. I think people seeing like it is on a ticket that's official. They're getting a number, a violation number associated when they're getting the notification letter. So we hope that'll kind of make the process more streamlined for the zoning code violation per area of this whole bigger picture.
I have a question for Ms. Bannock. I'm 99% sure I got something in the mail or in my slot in the office. And it was from the OregonCities.org, I think, and it was like 7 or 8 steps for good city governance. And one of the things in there talked about code enforcement.
About this?
That's it right there, local
Yep.
government basics. In fact, if somebody wants to open it, they could, so I don't have to paraphrase the part about what a tough job being a code enforcement officer is in the community. They also heartily recommend that codes be evaluated for change on a yearly basis, not decades or multi-decade basis. So I encourage our city council here to take that to your cohorts on the council and encourage that be done going forward.
All right. So the membrane structures, anybody have any more comments, Pat, about that?
Just that this section
Talk too much.
and the following 2 pages are a lot more clear than the snippet in the very first page.
So if it were to be put under Chapter 17, you're just asking that more of this language be incorporated. And so I think Melissa...
Because
said
like
you
this
would
section
address that.
talks about how like active uses, for example, and the front section didn't.
Right.
We'll take a closer look at that when we bring it back to you with suggested changes.
All
I had a
right.
lot more, but it was all in the stuff that's already
Yeah.
old.
I think we have a chairman for the whole revision program.
Yeah.
If you do the whole
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
Volunteer.
Not particularly.
You'd be good at it.
So, any other questions or anything else? And, we can close the public hearing.
I do have one more thing for you, but sort of out of scope of this. The alarm permitting process, I talked to you about that before.
Yes.
I don't think that issue's been resolved.
And I'll be happy to talk to you, and I should have followed up with you after this meeting to have a little chat.
Okay.
Anybody want to make a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing.
I second it.
Malachi made the motion and Natalie Smith seconded it. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. None opposed. The public hearing is closed. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if there's ever anything we can do to help with this process or make things better or do a workshop, we're willing to help,
Ooh, that's not a bad idea.
you know.
And that's something I think that a task force could help inform the other areas and neighborhoods within our community.
Get those citizens out there working.
Well, seriously, once we get this all resolved, when we have it, that's something I could see where we could utilize in a citizens group to help get the message out.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.
Oh,
Thanks.
Thank you. Chairman?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't remember the exact dates, but was it you didn't get your renewal?
So, we did the initial alarm permit. There's been
We're
no...
not-
I'm out, we're not done.
There's been no renewal
Oh.
request since then.
Sorry.
Is our former executive...
Sorry, we're not quite done with the meeting yet.
We gotta close we just have one more thing and then we'll close the meeting.
Things from the...
And I'm sorry, I need
Commissioners.
clarification. Are we making any recommendations to the city council at this point, or are we requesting all of this come back? Or
Um,
just,
So, for the earlier couple that were here, we do want to recommend that they organize that, right?
I think maybe, get
I
some
think we need to-
guidance
we
from the
need to
planner,
talk
but
some
I
more,
think
yeah.
that we need to go over, let them update what they want to update before we recommend that.
No, I meant about the CPO thing.
I think we need to figure out some guidelines. I think you're right,
Well,
Chair
I think
Willett.
that that's a discussion. I think everybody needs to think about that and discuss it, in a small arena first. Get some ideas and stuff, and then at some point they'll come back and want to talk about it. I personally think that I don't know for sure what they really want.
I'm not sure they know yet
Kind
either.
of felt like they wanted some sort of backing to allow them some sort of privilege to get some to dig into information, and I just don't know how.
I think that every citizen has a right to do that. In my
Yeah,
mind,
yeah.
if they put a group together and did what they want to do, that'd be great. And they, during a public hearing, they could bring all that stuff, get on the agenda for the apartments on Abernathy or whatever, and do a presentation on their findings,
Right.
which other people have done, in my mind.
Yeah.
But I think what I was getting, what they might have wanted was another commission or committee in the city.
That's what
And
I was getting from
I-
it as well.
They wanted a task force to look into, what are the guidelines for making the bylaws, what are the guidelines for drawing the boundaries, right? They don't want to be the ones making all the choices for everybody in the city. They want the city to have a task force to come up with those decisions. That's what they
Long time
said.
ago.
Hey, I just, in my mind, I just don't see how that could possibly happen.
I think you may have misunderstood. I think what they're talking about is looking into the possibility of having individual neighborhoods within Gladstone organize little groups within their own neighborhoods to be involved in items that specifically affect them. The city of Portland has 95 recognized neighborhood associations spread throughout the city for a population of a little over 600,000. So that's an average of about 6,000 residents per of these little groups, and some are larger than that, some are smaller than that. If they were proportional in size, you'd only have 2 maybe in Gladstone. But it might be that people who say they live in Sherwood Forest, or they live on the hill near Cracksburger, or they live in the mobile homes near the river, or they live in the flat area close to downtown, those identified areas might want to organize a group that that takes a little more active role, and rather than waiting for something to come up and then reacting to it, which is kind of way this group got organized when, and as you mentioned a couple of times, when complexes come into the neighborhood. They're more doing some proactive look at what their own neighborhood wants.
And I think that I got that. The part that I didn't get was to me, I thought I heard her say that she wanted the city, another city committee or something to oversee this.
Not so much to oversee, but I think maybe to set how it could be
Well,
set
established.
guidelines.
Well, if, you know, like Linda Cosgrove doesn't like duplexes, and she's made that public. And I've talked to her in length about this, and I think what she needs to understand is if what that group would do is put together like an overlay for historic Gladstone and then prohibit duplexes. But you can't just prohibit duplexes in the city of Gladstone. It's state law prohibits that. Total ban on duplexes.
I think I got the sense that they were looking for kind of a blessing from the city to
Yeah.
move forward with,
For the
initially,
concept.
with
I
what
d-
they wanted to do.
I'm interested in Commissioner Langston. Have you run across these in your business? Have you had to deal with one in groups, or did you?
Yeah, it could be held up. I forget what the name of a process is, but a community gets involved and they file like paperwork to hold a review of a design that is being proposed in the neighborhood. I've seen those before, but you know, kind of picking up on what you were saying, like I felt like what they were proposing was some sort of certification from our commission that would allow them to do whatever kind of investigation they needed, you know, outside of what maybe they personally would be capable of doing because they had some sort of certification or whatever. I felt like that's kind of what they were asking for, like some sort of power above and beyond what they might personally only have. It's kind of what I felt like. Like they wanted information. I don't know how it works, but like almost like they wanted all the information that maybe we might have, and then the ability to, you know, communicate directly to these, you know, a developer or something based on that they have this title of a group.
So that is something that was recommended to us in our training, that we start encouraging the citizens to get together with the developers without us present. And right now we're not doing that, but it was encouraged. That
So
we
how
start
about
doing
we give notice, you know, once they get their group set up, we can do the notice of the building permits and the pre-conference or pre-application conferences and stuff like that. I don't think there's anything, you know, that would stop them, and I personally would want to encourage them to do that, but you know, I thought it was more than that, like they wanted another committee with the city or another...
They wanted a task force, because one of the things she specifically asked about was, you know, what should they be putting in their bylaws? And so we do have a group who's responsible for like the committees and all that, right? Is that still around? There was a task force that was looking into like how all the committees and all that are organized. Is that still around?
No, we passed all the rules regarding that.
Okay,
those have already been adopted.
So I guess the question would be, the things that you adopted in that regard, would they be enough for what they're looking for, or does there need to be a new section for this type of thing?
Well, I would think that the question you would have was, if a group of citizens came to you and say, for example, we're the official neighborhood association of Sherwood Forest, and we feel this way about this proposed development that's going in near our neighborhood. And then somebody else comes in and say, well, no, we're the official group from Sherwood Forest, and we have a completely different viewpoint on it. And what you want as a city is some guidance as to how these groups are established, and if there is some kind of systematic way that they become recognized as a citizens organization.
But who's going to manage that, you know,
Well, that's
honestly?
what they're saying. You can model it after the neighborhood organizations have been around for 40 years in Portland, and they now have grown to the extent that they have a budget. They provide, I think it's $100,000 per year per neighborhood association to operate.
You're saying the city gives them?
A bureau that does it. Now, I don't think they're wanting to go that far, and I don't think people do.
Well, there's a couple things that come to my mind. First of all, the Planning Commission last met in January, so there's not been a ton of stuff on our plates that we can't handle.
Yeah.
You know, land use things. And I don't know for sure that they understand that all of this stuff has to be in a public hearing on those quasi-judicial things. they can meet with the developers or whoever they want, but we're not gonna hear about it until that planning commission when we look at that, or the city council, when the city council looks at that. You can't talk about it outside of a public hearing.
No, I think perhaps they were just wanting to, they recognized the value of the social capital that was sort of emerged from this most recent case, and probably, as Malachi said, in some earlier cases too.
And I think I encourage them to.
I want that to be ongoing rather than just in response.
And I think that would be great if they did that. I know there's things in my neighborhood that, I know my neighbors care about, and they are different than what they care about in Sherwood Forest.
Exactly.
And I think that would be fine if my neighbors put together a little group and got themselves on the agenda, and they can say whatever they want.
They use two different terms, though, which I don't think are necessarily parallel. They first started with a community planning organization, then they used the term neighborhood association.
Yeah.
And task force.
Yeah, a neighborhood association is more of a mini government that sets a few rules within a specific neighborhood. And community planning, they made it sound like they would work in this environment, just in kind of big picture framework on how this is all going to go together. So
yeah, I
two
think
different
the term neighborhood association is sometimes associated with a homeowners association that sets rules like what color you can paint your house.
Or can.
What you can do and what you can't do.
I didn't hear them talking about, I think when you raised the question on those kinds of issues, is that they tried to say that's not, but neighborhood association is the term that's used in Portland to fulfill more of this local community planning function. Is that your experience? You've seen it at the county level, and they mentioned Milwaukee and some of the unincorporated areas. How do these...
Well, Clackamas, my name is Mike McAllister. I'm the planning director. I'm also a 25-year resident of Gladstone.
Woohoo! All righty.
Timer, huh?
So Clackamas County has what we call CPOs, which are community planning organizations. There's a structure for them.
I was going to ask you that.
They're getting to your point, Commissioner Langston, they're what they term recognized, right? And so they don't have any taxing authority or anything like that, but they're recognized community planning or neighborhood organizations. We have boundaries. We have 36 of them in the county. They have established boundaries, district boundaries. They stay active by having so many meetings a year. They have to have bylaws, so many meetings a year, minimum meeting minutes, all those sort of things. Clackamas County gives them, I think, each one about $500 for like meetings, rooms, and some expenses and that sort of thing. And you heard, I think the testimony is accurate. Some of the CPOs, sometimes they become inactive and they just kind of go away for a while, and then because of interest or whatever it is, but they become active again by having so many meetings. There are some ones that have expanded to more than just planning. The sheriffs are there, and they're talking about politics and all kinds of things that happen in the community, but they're primarily organized for planning purposes, and their role is the benefit of that is that community planning organization gets direct notice of every land use application in their boundary, and then they're asked to comment on them as a group or a community. They don't have any more weight, if you will, than
they're strictly advisory.
Than any other citizen commenting, but they're certainly trying to bring a voice, and that's how the county operates them. But there is a process for them to get organized, create districts, bylaws, all those sort of things in order to be recognized.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
My thought is, more on a positive note, if these are organized, can planning or the city say, hey, we're trying to get the message out to all the citizens. Could you share this in your meeting? Can they work together for something like that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, for example, when we do code amendments.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking.
We send all the code amendments to all the CPOs.
Okay.
So all of them get it, and that's a way to get information.
They can actually help and call and say, hey, Officer Boyle, there's a violation here. Okay.
And that's actually already in Gladstone's code. If you look in section 1794.020, notice includes recognized neighborhood or community organizations. So they're already getting notice of quasi-judicial hearings. I don't know if there's another section in the code, I haven't looked into it yet, about how those groups are formed, or there's no definition in Title 17 of recognized neighborhood or community organizations. I would assume if they're referenced in here, maybe they're somewhere else in the code about the structure, but I can
We
look
always
into
take
that.
a look at the one that Clackamas County has structured.
Good.
Yeah, and maybe that could be a guideline?
Mhm.
We have our governmental affairs staff who's sort of in charge of managing and CPOs and helping them start up. And
Okay.
there's some code provisions that tell you how you do that. We could certainly get those really.
Okay. Because I sensed a real interest, but I don't think they know which direction to go or what to do.
That's fair.
And I think it would be important, as long as everybody knows what the boundaries and the guidelines are, that
What do you
we can
think?
actually be an effective tool with each other.
I would just make a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My observation was they were fishing and looking for recommendations before they present them back to you. So I think that could be a big help
That's what I'm thinking.
for some things. Like code enforcement, they can help.
So, I actually was a member of a CPO in Aloha, and I did attend one meeting where we met with a developer to discuss specifically some landscaping changes they were planning on doing. And we actually met at the fire department for that. And I still get emails from them, because I forgot to cancel that email list. But yeah, I mean, mostly it was we got emails when there was something in our area that might impact us. We were invited to come and discuss it with the developer. And in my case, when the developer didn't comply with what we had agreed to, I actually called the code enforcement on them and got their project shut down for 3 months. So while we did not have any weight in ourselves, the developer had signed agreements with the CPO at the time, and that had some weight.
So do you want to contact them and let them know what you know? Because you definitely know more about it than I do.
Well, I mean, what they were talking about was correct. I think that, like Clackamas County, we need guidelines in place that we want them to comply with, right? Like, we want them to have bylaws. We want them to be publishing their meeting minutes, things like that. Like, we have certain guidelines that they have to comply with for us to recognize them as an official CPO.
They have to be able to set all that stuff up because, we don't want city staff to be doing that.
Yeah, I don't think the city staff should be doing much. Like, I don't think we want to give them access to the website, but I think that the city staff would probably be adding the PDF to the website, but that's probably about it.
Because this should really be citizen-driven.
Yeah.
And I could see where maybe the gentleman or the department you talked about could actually come and assist them to get started. Is that something they can do for Clackamas County, for the
I
citizens?
don't want to volunteer anybody to do work that's paid work. And, I think it needs to have more discussion. I think if somebody in this group wants to contact them and kind of give them an idea of what that would look like and what they need to do, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with us contacting them. What I'm saying is I think that what they were asking for is for the city to make a decision about what our guidelines are. And for that, we probably need more than just one of us to make that decision.
Yeah.
We probably need somebody on
Well,
city
there's
council.
some code
and
that's, if they could see what the county has, they have a web page just for that community thing.
Yeah.
And they could look at that and do some research on it and know what they have to do. And if they did all the legwork, I don't think the city would, city manager or whoever is in charge of that would have much objection. It's just a time where we can't, volunteer their time to do a bunch of work when we don't even know for sure what their group is going to look like. So I've only seen 2 people in that group. I know they had a big following, and I think somebody brought that up as a point when you did, I think. once the Abernathy apartments are done, the room's empty. You know what I mean? It's been that way for years. And I've been at meetings at 2 in the morning where they were lined up out in the street over at the senior center for the duplex thing, or the Albertsons thing. And, you know, once that's done, it's an empty room again.
Yeah.
So,
It's hard to keep attendance.
I don't want to be, you know, the sayer of negativity, but
No,
you know,
I'm not perceiving it that way either. I think they need to have some structure and know what it is that their intentions are.
if they want to do it, they need to do the work and then present it, and then
Contact with you as a stepping stone to get these to get the rules of the road for what the other county organizations are doing.
Sure, we can direct them to where that is. It's just in the context of Title 17, mostly what we're going to be involved with is the noticing requirements, so...
There's the first step for them.
Title 17.
So, you want to volunteer Melissa to be a contact to them?
Well, I can't volunteer Melissa. She'd have to put her own hand up.
That's fine, I'm happy to help direct them to where a code example
Right.
language
And
is.
that all has
their
to be
process.
approved by the city administrator or the city administrator's designee for you to do any work on this, I'm sure.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, what I'm offering would just be to show them on the website where they can find the
Yeah.
code, which would be, I'm happy to do just as a
How about
senior planner at
CPOs
the
101?
county, not for Gladstone.
Really? Okay.
Would it be as easy as just letting them know what code it was so that they could find it?
Yeah.
I mean, could we, would that be something we could do, is just let them know, hey, you want to look into this code?
Should we involve Ms. Betts in this?
I can certainly talk with her about that, yes.
Came up and
Yes.
maybe she can give us some direction
Sure.
on where, how to...
Yep, we can do that.
All right.
Any more business from the commission?
Oh, are we getting to that point?
I think this was business, wasn't it?
Oh.
Do you have any recommendations regarding...
Oh, yeah,
Sorry, I just want to make sure we're staying on task.
So, does somebody want to make a recommendation?
Well, I thought they were going to come back.
Well, we need to, I think, make a motion to submit to end the thing, right, to the city council that we want to look at it again at some point with updates or something.
Oh, you're talking about this,
Yeah.
the codes. Yes.
Are you wanting to go, there's 4 different categories here. Are you wanting to make a recommendation on each category? I know it was discussed of bringing something back to the commission. I just want to know where you're at on each of the different...
I think there was only one that they were planning on coming back with, right?
Well, I think the vacant building one
Yeah.
needs a
Vacant
lot of
building
work,
one.
and I think that they want to do that work.
Right.
Other than that, I was good with all of them.
So was I. It was the matter of the vacant buildings in conjunction with Title 17.
He did have a few text changes he's going to be implementing.
Correct.
But I think
And
the recommendation could be worded something like, we recommend these 3 things to the city council to be adopted in some form with updates or something. Something like that. Is that what do you think, Melissa? What good?
It sounded like they were small corrections in response to your recommendations in those other sections, so, I mean, I don't have as much history on the process as you do, but if
I would
that...
just say making a recommendation, including the proposed changes that were discussed this
Mhm.
evening, to the council. The only concern I have is, I believe it was the vacant buildings that was discussed coming here before it's moved on to the council
Yeah.
again.
Mhm.
Or you want, and so I would make a recommendation as to what you want to do with that as well. If you're wanting to send it on with the changes that the police chief was proposing, or if you want to review it again.
Let's review I think we should review the vacant buildings. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
going to for us again, so.
All right. So somebody can make the first motion to make a recommendation to include the 3.
I'll make a motion that we submit the excluding the vacant one, to city council with the changes provided by Officer Boyle. And then make another recommendation that we hold off on the vacant until the proposal comes back to us.
So we have a motion made by Malachi which covers both, everything in one motion. Second?
I second this motion.
Pat Smith seconded the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. None opposed. Motion passes. Any other business from the Planning Commission?
I do. There's a couple of items that I spoke to Chair Roulette about in regards to some changes, some repairs that I think were noted as minor repairs at the old Tebow's restaurant. And I actually physically went there and looked inside and saw that it was completely gutted.
Mm-hmm.
And I have concerns for a lot of reasons. Number one, I think they just had a certain type of, minor modification type. I mean, we got verbiage back that it had been looked at, but I don't know if anyone else actually physically went there and looked inside the building, because I'm sure there was asbestos in the building. I don't think there was an abatement or permit taken out for that, nor was there for lead paint. And we've had some things fall through the cracks in the past. I'm sure you've been updated on all that.
Right.
And I want to get on the right foot in the sense that as a planning commission as a whole, we want to be informed of the permits when it comes to any kind of remodeling, because oftentimes we're the eyes and the ears of the community and we watch these things. And more than a few times, citizens have asked us, what's the status on it? And it was never even brought before us. We don't know anything about it. But the Tebow's one is a concern, because I don't think that was handled properly at all.
So, and that kind of all got initiated and approved before I was here, so I was playing a little catch-up, and I did send an email out to Jackie in response to your questions, and you got that. So where it's at right now is it's kind of in building permits range and area of enforcement kind of capability. So what's happened, I guess, is there was, in reading through building code's description of where they are in the review and the inspections process, there was more water damage than they thought there was when they were going in and removing some of the panels, I guess, is how they described it. So they had to do much more demolition and gutting work than they initially thought they were going to have to do. And I'm not sure if that was a requirement from building codes for structural codes. I mean, if there was water damage and there was structural insufficiency in the building and they had to remediate it by X, Y, and Z. I haven't gone and talked to building codes yet. If you want more information, I'm happy to dig in a little more. It's my understanding there's no violation per se from what the actual building permits allowed to happen. Or I think there was a design review approved as well in relation to that.
But that was mostly for landscaping.
But it was for landscaping, and so there.
And for protection of the water in the back, if I recall.
Okay. So I can coordinate with Clay, because he's the one who knows more about it. It's my understanding there's no active building codes violation yet, but I can follow up.
I bet there was no permit taken out for the items I mentioned,
Okay.
and that was an old building.
Yeah.
And I would highly doubt that those should have occurred, and I doubt that they did.
And that's been on our radar, and I've been coordinating with Sean on that one, so I'll check in again and see kind of where it's at with building codes and with Clay. So.
You were saying that there was some water damage issues. Was that like within the internal framework of the structure? Because they did a lot of work on the exterior. I mean, they basically redid the whole exterior facade.
What was described in just the comments on our permit tracking system for the building permits was in the exterior walls there was more water damage discovered than previously thought, so they had to do a more extensive kind of.
That makes sense to what I saw, what they were doing.
Yeah, it's been completely gutted, all the way to the studs.
And I noticed too that they took out the front landscaping, which sounds like they have a landscape permit, so.
I can double check and see if it's in compliance with the
I think some of the vehicles parked on where the landscaping is that is a violation.
Yeah,
I know they're supposed to be.
And that's what they're working on right now. If you drive by there now, they've totally
Move the cars out?
move the cars out.
Yeah.
Then they took out all there was like rocks and
Right.
walkways. It's all been graded down.
They've
to-
done some work.
Yeah.
Good.
So in terms of the landscaping, and I think they were putting in gravel or some other type of surfacing material that was inconsistent with the design review that was approved, those two kind of components are subject of a draft violation letter that I've been working on with Sean that he's going to send out
Good.
based on that template.
So the one thing I remember from the review was, I think it was the bottom right corner, there was, I think, a bioswale or something.
Mhm.
And we are very adamant that they protect that. So I would double check that as well.
So they're inconsistent with the surface water management requirements. That's one of the things we point out in the letter that's being described as a violation. So that's definitely high priority. We do say it's been, Clay sent kind of an unofficial just notification, hey, you're in violation of the design review conditions of approval about 8 months ago. So we point that out in the letter. We include a date in there saying when the $500 daily fines are going to start being assessed, which Sean and I felt was appropriate given the length of duration the violation seems to have been going on, and they're
Going on quite a while.
they're
yeah.
non-compliant, so they're not they haven't been actively trying to comply, is what the sense we've gotten and Clay has explained. So hopefully when they get this letter and kind of see that date of when these fines will start being assessed, we'll get some movement and something figured out positive. But I'm helping Sean kind of facilitate
Right.
his enforcement by identifying the code sections and conditions of approval from the design review that was approved. So he's using the right kind of legal statements in the violation letter.
I do hope that someone has the time to follow up and find out if those permits for removing asbestos and
Yeah, I can certainly check into the building code side of it and see what's been approved on their end.
Is there any review on the off-site lighting as pertaining to that back road?
That hasn't come up yet as an issue. I haven't looked into that, but I can, for sure. Yeah.
If I recall, the lighting approval was based on not going over the neighbor's property line.
Like their light traveling across the road, and I was wondering about that too.
It is now.
Their lights, it looks like they did something different to the lights to make it brighter. I don't think it was anything Tebow had up. And I imagine that they would want their lot a little more lit up than what a restaurant would want. But I do know on the back side of the building, it's still relatively dark back there, and I didn't know if there was any requirements for them to run calcs or anything back there.
And I do like this report. It's nice because it says clearly when there's a permit taken out.
Oh, good.
Oh, this is very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome aboard.
Thanks.
I hope we can all know where we're at and on the same page. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Everybody done? I have nothing more than I already contributed.
Someone want to make a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Pat Smith moved.
I second.
Natalie Smith second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. None opposed. Motion passes. We're adjourned.